All right, so we're diving deep into Halloween this time.
Sounds spooky.
You guys requested this one, and we really dug into the research. I mean, we even found a sermon transcript about Halloween alongside like all these historical articles.
Oh, wow. That's quite a range.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be really interesting to see how all these different perspectives come together to tell Halloween's story.
I think the listener's going to have a much richer understanding of how Halloween came to be. It's so much more than just the candy and costumes we see today.
Exactly. So every single one of our sources pointed back to this ancient Celtic festival, Samhain. And I've got to say, I found it written like a bunch of different ways. Samhain, Samhain. But pronunciation aside, we're talking about one of the oldest traditions in the world.
And it really gets at like this core human need to understand death, you know? What lies beyond.
Right. And our sources all emphasize that the Celts, they saw this time as liminal, like the end of summer, moving into the darkness of winter.
Exactly. It was all about taking stock, preparing for those harder months, and honoring the cycle of life and death. The Celts believed that during Samhain, the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead thinned, and so spirits could cross over.
But it wasn't just like friendly ancestral spirits, right? One source even mentions elves, fairies, sprites, and some, let's just say, less than benevolent entities.
Oh, yeah.
That could make an appearance, too. That's a Halloween party I don't know if I'd want to go to.
It's interesting to think about how the Celts dealt with this, you know? Like, they built bonfires not just to get rid of bones, but also to ward off those bad spirits.
And think about costumes. Imagine trying to blend in or scare off those spirits by disguising yourself.
Wow.
Oh, we can't forget about leaving out food offerings. That tradition could go back 2,000 years.
It's amazing how much of this we still see today. But you know, when Christianity came along, things got more complicated. You mentioned that sermon transcript. It makes Halloween sound pretty devilish.
Yeah, it really does. But now that we know how deep Samhain goes, you have to wonder, was Halloween really made evil by Christianity, or is there more to the story?
Right. Well, I think it was less about corruption and more about assimilation. The church, you know, instead of just wiping out pagan traditions, they often tried to absorb them.
Like make them their own.
Exactly.
So, strategically placing All Saints' Day on November 1st, right on top of Samhain, that was no accident.
Yeah. It was a calculated move, not unique either. They did this with a lot of pagan holidays, trying to put Christian meaning on top of existing celebrations.
Makes sense. And speaking of those attempts to Christianize Halloween, that sermon transcript actually mentions soul cakes. What were those all about?
Oh, soul cakes were part of this medieval practice called souling. People, often children, would go door to door and offer prayers for the dead in exchange for these little cakes.
So basically the precursor to trick-or-treating, but with prayers instead of candy.
Exactly. It just shows how deep these Halloween traditions go.
But wait, there's another layer to this door-to-door tradition, right?
Yeah.
One of the sources talked about Guy Fawkes Day. And I'm assuming not everyone knows this, but it commemorates this plot to blow up the British Parliament back in 1605. It involved people going door to door in costumes.
Yeah, but there's a twist. They weren't offering prayers. Sometimes they would threaten mischief if they didn't get treats or money.
Wow, so we've got these Celtic, Christian, and even like politically rebellious threads, all woven together to make what we know as Halloween incredible.
It really shows how cultural practices evolve and blend over time, and often in ways you wouldn't expect. Speaking of unexpected, one of the sources mentioned that Halloween wasn't always super popular in early America.
Oh yeah, those strict Protestant beliefs, they really put a stop to the fun for a while. But then in the mid to late 19th century, something happened, and Halloween really took off. What was it?
Well, it was a pretty tragic event, actually. The Irish potato famine. A lot of Irish immigrants had to flee to America, and they brought their Halloween traditions with them.
And those traditions really resonated with other Americans, leading to Halloween being more widely accepted. It's amazing how something so tragic could have such a huge impact.
Really shows how cultural exchange often happens during times of upheaval. Speaking of things coming over from Ireland, one of our sources talks about the legend of Stingy Jack. You know, the origin of the jack-o'-lantern.
Oh yeah, the story of the guy who tricked the devil and then was doomed to roam the earth with just a burning coal inside a carved-out turnip to light his way.
Which means that originally jack-o'-lanterns were made from turnips, not pumpkins.
No way. Why the switch then?
Well, when those Irish immigrants got to America, they realized pumpkins were everywhere and way easier to carve than turnips.
Huh. And so, the jack-o'-lantern as we know it was born.
Pretty much.
It's so interesting how even small practical things can shape tradition like that. But this deep dive is just full of surprises. I read about this woman named Elizabeth Krebs from Kansas. She was super important in changing how Halloween was celebrated.
Yes, Elizabeth Krebs. Fascinating figure.
What did you find out about her?
So in the early 1900s, Halloween in America was kind of known for getting a little rowdy, even some vandalism. But Elizabeth Krebs, she wanted to shift that energy to something more community-focused, make it more family-friendly.
Like a Halloween superhero. So what did she actually do to make that happen?
Well, in 1914, she organized this thing called the Hiawatha Halloween Frolic. In Hiawatha, Kansas, it was a huge success. Parades, costumes, games, all sorts of fun, safe activities. And other towns started doing similar events, which really changed how people saw Halloween.
It's amazing how one person's vision can spread like that. But speaking of those rowdier times, one of our sources really goes into the different theories about trick-or-treating. Some people say it comes from that medieval souling tradition we talked about. Others say it's more connected to those mischievous Guy Fawkes Day practices.
It is interesting how those threads all come together, and while no one knows for sure where it started, one theory is that trick-or-treating was basically a way to appease those mischievous kids, like, give us treats or we'll cause trouble.
Playful extortion with costumes and candy. Love it. But regardless of where it came from, by 1927, the phrase trick-or-treat shows up in print in Canada. So it was officially part of North American culture.
And from there, it just exploded, especially as Halloween became more and more commercialized.
Which is another interesting part of Halloween, right? It started as this spiritual and ritualistic thing, and now it's this massive commercial holiday. How did that happen?
Well, making it more family-friendly definitely played a role. Once you had all these organized events and trick-or-treating, well, businesses saw an opportunity to get in on the action. Costumes, decorations, and of course, candy.
So basically, trying to prevent vandalism and rowdiness actually led to Halloween's commercial boom.
Unintended consequences.
As trick-or-treating became the norm, candy companies were like, jackpot.
They started marketing their products specifically for Halloween.
Which explains why we have so many Halloween-themed candies today.
Targeted marketing at its finest.
The TV and movies also played a part, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think about all those classic horror movies and Halloween specials.
Those definitely shaped how we see the holiday.
For sure. Movies like Halloween and Hocus Pocus introduced all these new monsters and creatures, added to that spooky, fun vibe.
And you can't forget those cartoon specials like It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown.
Those really cemented Halloween as a fun community event for kids.
It's amazing how all these different types of media helped make Halloween such a cultural phenomenon.
Storytelling is powerful stuff.
Okay, so you asked about those fun facts I found. Let's start with black cats and witches. I've always wondered why they're so connected to Halloween.
Well, that association goes way back to the Middle Ages. Black cats were seen as suspicious, sometimes even bad luck or demonic familiars.
Oh, so that's where that superstition comes from.
And witches, who people thought practiced dark magic, they were often shown with black cats, which just added to that connection.
Those old beliefs and fears are powerful. What about the colors, though? Black and orange?
Those have both Celtic and natural associations. Black represents the darkness of winter, the end of the harvest, and the thinning veil between worlds.
Right, back to Samhain. What about orange?
Well, orange is all about the fall harvest. Pumpkins, abundance before winter.
It's cool how we still use those colors to decorate today.
It's that connection to nature and the changing seasons.
Okay, this next one really surprised me. Bobbing for apples.
What about it?
Apparently goes all the way back to the Romans. They had this festival for Pomona, the goddess of fruit and trees. And bobbing for apples was a popular activity.
Wow, those Halloween games really have a history.
It makes you wonder what other hidden connections are out there.
Traditions are always evolving and mixing together.
Okay, last one, and it's about candy. Did you know that candy apples were probably an accident?
An accident? How'd that happen?
So back in 1908, this candy maker named William Kolb was playing around with red cinnamon candy. And he decided to dip some apples on sticks into the mixture. He wasn't even planning to sell them, just put them into shop window as decoration.
And I bet people loved them.
They were a hit. And that's how the candy apple was born.
That's a great story. Sometimes the best things happen by chance. Speaking of candy, you said something about chicken feed.
Oh yeah, candy corn. Believe it or not, when it first came out in the late 1800s, it was called chicken feed because of its shape.
No way.
I know, right? Can you imagine calling it that today?
It's such a classic Halloween candy.
It's crazy how something marketed as chicken feed became so iconic.
It just shows you how much things can change over time.
So Halloween, it's this mix of traditions, beliefs, and practices from different cultures and different eras. It's all blended together to create something unique and lasting. But it makes you wonder, what's next?
That's a great question to think about as we wrap up this deep dive.
But you mentioned earlier how Halloween's becoming this global thing.
It is, yeah.
Where are we seeing this happen?
It's really interesting to see how Halloween, with its roots in like Celtic and European traditions, it's kind of transcended those origins. It's being embraced all over the world in different forms.
Yeah, it feels like every year I see more countries celebrating, even if they don't have that direct historical connection to Halloween.
Globalization and pop culture have a lot to do with that. Think about how many people watch American Halloween movies and TV shows. Those images, those stories, they make Halloween familiar and interesting.
Like planting a seed. But what about cultures that already have their own traditions around honoring the dead, especially around this time of year? How does Halloween fit in with that?
That's a good question. In many cases, Halloween exists alongside those traditions. Sometimes it complements them, sometimes they even blend together. A great example is Mexico's Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead.
Dia de los Muertos is so beautiful and vibrant. It's about remembering and honoring loved ones who have passed away, not fearing death.
Exactly. And while some people might worry that Halloween could overshadow these older traditions, I actually see it as a chance for cultural exchange and appreciation.
So instead of a threat, it could be like a spark, something that encourages people to explore their own traditions even more.
Yeah, exactly. It can start conversations and help us all understand the different ways humans deal with life, death, and remembering those who are gone.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive. Ancient origins, how Halloween's evolved, commercialization, and now its global reach. It really makes you wonder what's next for Halloween.
Well, if history's any guide, Halloween's going to keep adapting and changing. I wouldn't be surprised if technology starts playing an even bigger role.
Oh, like virtual haunted houses? Trick-or-treating in the metaverse?
Totally possible. We're already seeing augmented reality stuff popping up for Halloween. As technology keeps advancing, those experiences are just going to get more immersive and interactive.
Yeah, that's kind of exciting and kind of creepy at the same time. But Halloween has always been about pushing boundaries and embracing what we don't know.
That's what makes it so enduring. It lets us explore our fears, our fantasies, and our sense of wonder.
It reminds us that even in our modern world, with all its technology, there's still room for magic and mystery.
And as long as we hold on to that spirit, I think Halloween will stick around for a long time.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the history of Halloween, from ancient Celtic rituals to a global celebration.
I hope you have a new appreciation for this holiday and how it keeps evolving.
I definitely do. And for everyone listening, here's a final thought. We've seen how Halloween has changed over centuries, blending old beliefs with new practices. So what role do you want to play in shaping the future of Halloween?
Will you embrace the new tech stuff? Stick with the traditions you love? Or maybe find a way to mix the old and the new?
That's up to you. Happy Halloween, everyone.